But let's get to our honored guest, if you will. Joining me for the first time in our new home, as we like to refer to it on the coalition, it's someone who's been a repeat offender on our show, has visited us a number of times over the last few years, is JoAnne Leppanen. She is the executive director of RIPAC. She is in a variety of roles. I'll call her the Florence Nightingale, if you will, of the medical cannabis movement, someone who is there for everyone, someone who has, in addition to a number of great volunteers, is probably one of the greatest reasons why we have a great program for the folks in this state who are suffering. Despite every imaginable challenge over the last 4 or 5 years, after the inception of a program which took, some would argue, almost a generation to create, despite all of that, RIPAC, JoAnne, serves as a safety net, as an advisor, as someone who cares for some of the people who are most vulnerable in the state. JoAnne, welcome to the Coalition 2.0.
Well, thank you, Pat. I don't think I can live up to what you said, but,
Well, you do every day. Let's, we like to call it as we see it here. There are, despite all the challenges this state faces, despite the seemingly relentless siege that the ordinary citizens of this state are under, there are people in the state like yourself who extend themselves beyond what mere mortals can do and routinely kind of hold this state together with some form of holy duct tape. I'm not sure how you do it. Just a year or so ago, you and I were standing outside of a very cold, and Tony was there as well, outside of a very cold state house, standing with people who are suffering from afflictions that, again, mere mortals, it would bring them down, and testifying against a confiscatory tax that the governor was arguing for. You managed to largely withstand that challenge, and we'll get into some of those issues. But now, what we have is we've got towns across Rhode Island gone wild, who, and these are my words, not yours, who have chosen to legislate state policy from the confines of their own town council. How did we get here?
well, that's an excellent question. This program has been around, has been so successful for 11 years. For 11 years, patients and their caregivers have been quietly growing in their local towns and cities with very few problems. The Attorney General's office, when the conversation about legalization for recreational use, adult use, started heating up, they got more interested in curbing growing. It affected the medical program. So Joey Lindbeck, Assistant Attorney General, started going out to the cities and towns and doing what we refer to as her one-woman reefer madness show.
Right.
And if you didn't know anything about the medical marijuana program and you only listened to her, you may believe just the very worst things about this program. Again, really, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say reefer madness.
No.
So that had a great impact. So there are 39 cities and towns. She gets paid a salary to go out and talk to the cities and towns. We don't.
Right.
So it's been really hard to keep up with it. There is no central base where you can look and see what all the towns are doing on any particular day.
Correct.
So sometimes we don't even find out about it till the day of or after. In the case of Gloucester, we did not find out about their ordinance until after it had passed. So, it's very difficult to keep up with, but definitely this was an agenda that came from the Attorney General's office, and it's been an incredible one-sided presentation. We've gotten some help from DBR, who's been really reasonable and rational about it, and other than that, it's just up to us, and it's up to the patients and caregivers to show up. Here's the problem. If you are growing cannabis in your town, one of your primary obligations is to be discreet.
Right.
If you're growing medicine for someone else, it's your job to keep that secure. If you're growing for yourself, you don't need to impact your neighbors. The fewer people who know about it, the better. So the only way people can fight for themselves is to show up at a local meeting and disclose the fact that they are growing to the public.
Right.
Well, it'd be very easy to find out where they live, so they're really placing themselves in harm's way.
Correct.
So it can be very difficult to get the patients and the caregivers to get there at all, and for good reason.
Right.
I don't want to encourage anybody to go there and then They could be robbed the next day. It's insane. But what was so shocking about Smithfield, particularly, is we found out about that public hearing just before it happened on this ordinance. It was shocking in and of itself. It was shocking, it was mean, it was cruel, it was cold. So we imagined that it was going to be like other towns, where we would show up and say, listen, this is the effect that this is going to have on patients, and they'd say, oh, wait a minute, we better slow down here. And, have some more meetings, maybe do some workshops, maybe form a task force. That is not the way it happened in Smithfield at all. They were not interested in hearing from us at all. We had one town councilor who said all the right things. She said very intelligent, appropriate things, objections to this ordinance, but then 2 minutes later it seemed she said, oh, but I'll vote for it. And what was the rush? They had to vote on it that night. We have reached out to them since the ordinance passed with no response. So they have left us. So, I don't think anyone takes a great joy, generally speaking, in suing people. It's a lot of work. And they have left us no choice. They wouldn't listen to anybody. First of all, when they were drafting this, there were no patients, caregivers consulted in the process. Then when they put it out for a public hearing, they shut down and didn't care how it was going to impact patients and caregivers. When people reached out to them to educate them after the fact, phone calls were not returned. So what choice do they give us? This is a town who seems to want to get sued. What they are doing is totally in conflict and undermining the state law. Let me be specific.
Yeah, and let's take a second, because let's reflect for folks who may not be familiar with the medical cannabis program. And if you're not, in a very real sense, you should feel blessed, because that means your family somehow, and your statistical anomaly, has been spared any one of a number of serious illnesses for which medical cannabis can be a significant benefit to the quality of life of the people involved.
That is really well put. That is really well put, Pat. And I think it's almost 1 out of every 50 residents right now of the state of Rhode Island is in the medical marijuana program.
Right.
So it is not as if, somehow medical marijuana patients are a different species, or some kind of subspecies, or people who just love marijuana. What we have here is people with very serious, debilitating medical conditions, and this is the medicine that works for them. We have been able to keep people off opioids. We have helped people recover from opioid addictions. I wish I were exaggerating when I tell you this, but there are so many people that I know who would not be alive today if it weren't for this program. This is a successful program, and so many patients have been growing their own. Because, when this program went into effect in 2006, there was nowhere to get it, except the illegal market. So,
in fact, one of the initial motivations for it, and I was not involved at the time, but as someone who was a civilian who didn't know a lot about it, saw, quite honestly, the dignity in folks who are very, very ill being able to go to a safe, approved source than literally having to go to a street corner dealer.
Absolutely, and it took a long time for us to open up dispensaries. Those are relatively recent. So for years, patients had no alternative. They either had to grow their own, go to the illegal market, or find somebody who would grow it for them that they could trust.
Right. And this, by the way, despite your, and I'll lapse into the vernacular for a second, but despite your favorite Cheech and Chong movie, to the contrary, in the Northeast, this is a very difficult product to grow. This isn't your neighbor's beefsteak tomatoes. This isn't you going out and planting some basil. This is a highly sensitive, expensive, high-maintenance product to grow on your own.
And you're growing indoors. It is not like outdoor growing at all. It requires equipment, it requires a setup, it requires safety, it requires the right environment. Not everybody has the right environment to grow in. So there is a lot to it, you're right. And sometimes it took people, I have to tell you, at the beginning of the program, people started growing. It was, now we can laugh. But at the time, people were so frustrated because they just weren't successful at growing. It took them a long time to learn how to grow, and they had to stick with it. And they did it, if they were well enough to do it, they did it themselves. Many of them found a caregiver, perhaps a family member, to do it for them. And, it took money, it took time, it took dedication. And so we have found that some our patients who have the highest satisfaction levels are patients who have the most control.
Mm-hmm.
And if you grow your own medicine and you know what you're doing, then you have control.
Right.
And those are the patients who have been the healthiest, who have done so well. And they've worked hard to get there, but they got there.
Now, and then let's also speak directly to the perception that so many of the haters, that's my term, who look at this program as a cliche, not understanding the human costs involved, the human sacrifices, I'll call it the humanity of it, see this as just a way for a bunch of stay-at-home stoners to get legal weed. There is a process, a serious process involved in getting the card necessary. If you could speak to that just a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. You don't just walk into the medical marijuana program because you want to be there.
Right.
What you have to do, and it's much harder than getting a prescription. People refer to it as it is not a prescription.
Mm-hmm.
It is, you have to apply to the health department. You have to have your doctor sign your application. Then you send it into the health department to be processed.
Mm-hmm.
You must pay a registration fee. Now, that's something, if you're getting a prescription, you don't have to go to the health department and pay them money in order to get your prescription or be
Right.
eligible. In the case of medical marijuana, you do. And you also, if you're going to appoint a caregiver, that's $100 a year just for that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, so you have to go through this process. It has to be approved by the health department. That can take weeks. They're getting better, but it takes time.
Right.
And then they send you a letter out. They say, hey, come on in and get your picture taken once it has been approved. But you don't just walk into the medical marijuana
Right.
program. And I want to say this too, because this is important. You don't get into the medical marijuana program because you have anxiety, even though for some people anxiety can be absolutely crippling. You know,
Debilitating, absolutely.
that does not qualify. We don't have any of the psychological conditions that qualify except for PTSD. It took us years to get that added.
Right.
These, for the most part, physical,
But by the way,
debilitating,
which representative,
medical.
for the record, which representative helped you get that?
Well, you know who.
Well,
We have Representative Slater
Mhm.
was the primary sponsor,
Mhm.
and of course Senator Archibald
right,
in the Senate.
right.
Well,
Just to point that out, folks, that we need to move beyond caricatures. So the two of them worked tirelessly. This was a challenge, wasn't it, to get the PTSD through?
It was a challenge because, and, it would seem like every year, here's the weird thing, when this program first started, 2006, there was very little opposition to it.
Mhm.
Nobody really wanted to hurt patients.
Right.
Why would you want to hurt someone why would you want to get in their way? And, I was new to Rhode Island then,
Mhm.
and I was so impressed by, first of all, the people. We had Rhoda Perry then too.
Mhm.
We had the late great Thomas C. Slater
Mhm.
in the House. They were amazing. They were brave. They were bold. They were not like politicians in other states where they wouldn't touch it, put it out on referendum, they
Right.
would run. Here, and contrast it with Massachusetts, my goodness, we had two leaders who took this, they took it, they owned it, it was personal to them, they let everybody know how it was going to affect them and their loved ones.
Mhm.
In the case of Rhoda Perry, they were amazing, and they were leaders, and they weren't afraid, and they fought really hard.
Right.
So we had a very supportive legislator. I think it was 96% of them voted for this program.
Right.
It was amazing. So when I came into Rhode Island, it was to this impression of the legislature being the most compassionate body imaginable, and the people of Rhode Island as well. Because I can tell you, I expected to get a lot of opposition.
Mhm.
I was new to this, and I was not a marijuana person, by the way.
Mhm.
I didn't really know anything when I first started. And the reason I got so, I guess, addicted to this program is because I see what it does every day.
Right.
So I've learned. But coming into this, people were so supportive. People were so genuine. People were so, it was amazing.
And let's speak for a second. Let's give folks who might not be as familiar, or maybe have only seen the cliches and the hate speak. Let's talk about some of the conditions that are affected by that. You spoke about pain management, opioid addiction, some of the other issues, ALS.
ALS, any condition that is going to produce chronic pain, persistent chronic pain, has got to be serious. We're not talking
Right.
about a broken arm or broken leg here. We're talking about something that's going to be with you. We're talking about people who are resorting to all kinds of pain medications.
Right.
We are talking about pain that's not going to go away. We are talking about people who have been sentenced to probably a lifetime of pain and who are struggling to cope with that.
And we're not talking broken legs here. We're talking daily, chronic, unremitting, unrelenting pain.
Right.
In every step they take, every breath that they're capable of taking, despite, and all one has to do is go to a hearing about this and see folks be literally, it's heartbreaking to see folks be literally, in some cases, wheeled in so that they can provide some type of personal statement. And for the record, I'll say what I've said every time I've been able, or I've been blessed and fortunate enough to be associated with your organization and in all these different contexts, that the people involved in this, the patients, are truly warriors. I mean, these are people whose spirit is indomitable. I mean, it's astonishing. Here I am, feeling sorry for myself one afternoon in a cold day outside of the State House, and there are terminally ill folks, some of whom are no longer with us, out there fighting a fight that they know they won't see to win on behalf of other people that they don't even know.
Our patients are amazing. They are amazing. And I got to tell you, though, that sometimes, we see patients, and as you say, we'll see them, they'll make it to the State House, and they may not be there next year in some cases. And in other cases, they are getting so much healthier, and they are living longer, and they are having a quality of life. And this is so important to them that we have had an impressive number of patients really battle the odds just to get up to the State House to talk.
Talk about, too, if you can for a second, because in a sense, it's almost like a primer for some folks. The THC count, the getting stoned versus the tinctures and the medibles, and issues like that. Because, by the way, epilepsy is another significant area of explosive research. You've got young children here in Rhode Island and across the country who routinely suffer grand mal seizures, who the effects of which have been mitigated by their exposure to different medical forms of
I was
cannabis.
talking to the mother of a young patient the other day. 400 seizures, over 400 seizures in the course of a week.
And I'm not an expert, as I like to say, I literally play one on the radio, but the physical toll, look at seizures at two levels. Number one, there's what you go through while you're experiencing one. But the permanent neurological damage, and musculature damage that you experience as a result of every single seizure is horrific.
I think we all can identify with how we would feel if we had a child who had one seizure.
Right. And you're talking about a child who had 400 seizures.
Over 400 in the course of a week.
That's you're almost in a constant state of waking seizure.
Yeah. And you can't, it's beyond my imagination, really. One would be very difficult, but 400. These are parents that have, they're strong. They're so strong. But these kids are responding like a miracle to this medication.
It literally is. And
really
they're not getting stoned.
Oh, let me tell you something about getting stoned.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came to RIPAC, I knew nothing about medical marijuana. I have a bad habit of taking jobs that appeal to my sense of humor. And I, like a lot of people, I thought this was funny. Oh, medical marijuana, like that's funny, right?
Yeah.
And I hadn't used marijuana since high school, and I'm pretty old, so that was a long time ago. So what did I know? I knew nothing. So, and I learned. My background was in advocacy. I'm a retired attorney, and I did a lot of advocacy work, but this was new. And I couldn't imagine that I would stay with it long. But let me tell you, after 2 hours, this was not funny. You talked to the first couple of patients, and I saw how serious this was, how much it was helping them, how important it was to them, how difficult it was for them at the time to get access to it. And here I am, it's 10 years later, I'm still here. And I can't imagine ever stopping. I've met some, as you said, the patients are incredible. And you see every day, you see this kind of result. The other day, a woman came to one of our classes and she said she had blood cancer. She said ever since she started using cannabis, her numbers are great. Her doctor thinks she can stop chemo, has stopped her on the chemo. Her numbers are great. This is the explanation. We don't have the studies, no, but I can give you anecdotes every day of the way this is working. And when you have someone who has a diagnosis like blood cancer and they're doing fine, you don't want to do anything to disrupt that.
Right.
Why would you want to interfere? This is very seriously someone's health care. What I was going to say though, so when I came into this 10 years ago, one of after a couple of days, I noticed, I'd been to a couple of meetings of patients, and I said to the guy who was the executive director at the time, Jesse Sepp, how come none of these people seem stoned? And he said, well, I guess there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, maybe it's because when they use cannabis, it can be different than it is for a healthy person. Like that, the cannabinoids, the compounds of cannabis, are going in and doing what they need to do. So it's having a slightly different effect. Maybe the psychoactive effect is not so strong.
Mm-hmm.
The other reason is because after they've done it for a while, they're kind of accustomed to it, so they don't get the high. The other reason is they don't want to get high. They're not doing this to get high. So as time has gone on, in addition to those two factors, there are strains coming out that have much less THC, or they have more CBD.
Right.
CBD is a compound that counteracts the effects of the psychoactive effects. So that's what people are interested in. I don't know that I ever met a patient who was interested in getting stoned.
Right.
And that's just not, these people are fighting for their lives, for goodness sakes, in a lot of instances. And getting high is just not on the agenda. I would say the majority of the patients first coming into the program that I have worked with are kind of concerned about that. We have a lot of people who actually really don't like marijuana. They don't. They may have used it in college and they got paranoid or they got anxious, and the last thing in the world they want to do is get in the medical marijuana program. So they're searching for a way to get the benefits out of that plant without having any of the psychoactive effects. So we're seeing that more and more commonly now. And you also have people who want to be sure that they can do what they have to do in the course of a day,
Right.
without interference. So.
And fortunately, well, just as an aside, a few weeks ago we had an attorney on, a volunteer attorney from the ACLU, who steered the ship on a landmark case, a victory for medical cannabis patients.
She's our hero.
Yeah. Now, preventing effectively any future employment discrimination for folks who are ill and essentially medicated.
It's time to do a shout out to the ACLU on that as well.
You'll exactly. We folks, regardless of your political background, whether you like it or not, at some point in time in your life, the ACLU has helped you. ACLU, I think it was ACLU.org. Spend the $20, join. Essentially, there's been, if you will, two phases of the legalized medical cannabis movement here in the state. There was the initial legislation, and then last year we had significant revisions to the program that occurred in what I alluded to earlier in this post-Gina Raimondo, air quotes, reform. So as the program was initially envisioned, give us a little bit of an outline of what patients had to do to get their medicine.
Well, like I said, it was. There are some stories now we can laugh at them, but I'll tell you, someone would go, they would get their, they'd get their card from the health department. They would say to the woman behind the counter who took their picture, "Where's my marijuana? Why am I getting this card if you're not going to give it to me?"
Right.
And they did not understand. So then, in those days, the health department would send them over to our office. They'd come to us. Well, where's my marijuana?
Oh, and by the way, RIPAC. How much government money is the state of Rhode Island or health insurance companies giving you?
Oh, let me see. Nothing.
Okay, 0.0.
It's very easy to do the bookkeeping.
Right.
0. Yeah.
And before you go tonight, we'll give folks an opportunity or a way for them to send you money, because you folks are occupying really a wholly voluntary role in doing this. If it wasn't for RIPAC, this system would have failed years ago.
For the most part, is that the reason that RIPAC is important, especially now, is that every day that goes by, the conversation now is more and more about money. When we started this, there was no talk about money. This was just about getting patients. First of all, it's hard to remember. This is 2006. First of all, the first thing you wanted to say is, hey, no one gets arrested because they're medicating with this.
Right.
So that was the first part, is, hey, no one's going to get arrested. And then the second question is, well, where are they supposed to get it? What are we doing? Telling them to go out to the illegal market? Like, is this, who has sponsored this? The Drug Dealers of America? I mean, what are we doing? So then they had to make some provisions for, self-grows, or for people who are too ill, or who for one reason or another couldn't do it, to let someone else to do it for them.
Right.
That's how we got there. And, and as we said, it was tough, but eventually a lot of people were successful at it.
Right. Now, what were the general, you eventually had compassion centers, but what was generally the limitations on what patients could grow for themselves?
Patients can grow 12, they can have 12 mature plants. That's a mature.
And this is the original, under the original,
Mhm.
original, before last year's changes. So what could they do?
They can grow 12 mature plants, have 12 seedlings, babies. They can only possess 2.5 ounces of dried usable. So it's set up so that even if you can have 12 plants, you're not pulling huge amounts of cannabis off it, because you can only have 2.5 ounces of dried usable anyway.
Okay.
So it is set up so that people have the option of rotating those plants. One of the myths that has been spread lately, especially by the Attorney General's office and by some members of law enforcement, is that everybody who grows a plant is somehow, and also the governor's office last year, remember? That was in the paper that, people are pulling pounds off plants, pounds.
What was the
Pounds.
amount that the governor's
It was
office?
$17,000 worth of plants, I think. Every plant
Right.
was worth $17,000. And I have to tell you, the reaction from the patients was jaw dropping and laughing hysterically. They wished. First of all, here's how much you can get off a plant. You can get nothing, which happens to a lot of people.
Right.
You can get absolutely nothing. Maybe, a lot of patients I know would get 1/2 ounce, maybe 1 ounce.
Right.
Some get 2.5. They don't, they don't want to grow plants bigger than that. Most patients are growing in their homes anyway. They're not growing these huge trees. So there's a huge difference between, a commercial grower and someone who's just growing for themselves.
Right.
And even said that, I'm affiliated with a dispensary that's going to be opening in Massachusetts, and the cultivator there said he only plans to get 2.5 ounces off a plant. He's not going to grow them that large. So, but there is this myth that has been spread that, no, pounds are coming off these plants. which is some people's fantasy, and I suppose in some cases, a pound is probably possible, but you're talking about some serious growers here, and you're not talking about someone who is growing in an extra room in their house or in the basement of their home.
Right. I
With
think
low
people have been watching too many
ceilings.
episodes of Miami Vice.
Yeah.
And so the original program, there were some fairly serious restrictions, both on a practical level and effective level, on what people could do. Last year, you had a significant revision to the program. Now, originally, the governor wanted to tax extensively, tag the plants. Where are things now?
She did originally. I'm sorry. This is so. It's just.
It's otherworldly.
It's so crazy. Yeah. The initial proposal was for every plant being grown by a patient or by their caregiver for them, the patients would pay. What was it? Was it 175 or was it 150 per plant? Per plant.
Right.
And per year. And the caregivers would be, it was $350, $350.
Right.
For each plant.
Now, as an aside, let's understand that none of this is reimbursable by healthcare.
Right.
All right. There's a significant percentage of these folks who are in end stages of illness, who have essentially bankrupted themselves trying to save their lives. Most of these folks, or a significant portion, are not employed and not getting health insurance for any of their conventional. They're relying strictly on Medicare or Medicaid.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So you're taking literally, and I always have a disclaimer, some of the most frail amongst us, not spiritually, not emotionally, because these people are tough, but financially and their physicality is completely overwhelmed at this point.
About a third are on public disability programs, SSI or SSDI. We don't know how many are on private disability.
Right.
And we don't know how many people, I hear from people all the time who are waiting to get on SSI or SSDI.
Right.
That's not an immediate thing. In some cases, it can take years. So between the people who are on disability, who are underemployed or not employed, it stands to reason if someone has a serious medical condition, they probably are not going to be working, or they may not be working as many hours as someone else is. So their employment can be limited.
Right.
So, yeah, so generally speaking, I think it's safe to assume that the income levels of people in the medical marijuana program, and there's a good reason why they're going to be lower.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so to put that kind of burden on the on sick people, on people who are struggling, it was just crazier than crazy. But there's been sort of a disconnect, especially in the governor's office, and I'm talking about Lincoln Chafee before.
Mm-hmm.
There was some kind of disconnect between the medicine, cannabis that produces this medicine, and marijuana for fun. And in my conversations with Lincoln Chafee, I don't think he made that distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was the one that put in his budget at a time when he wasn't letting the compassion centers open, by the way, because he was afraid that the feds would come in and close them down.
Right.
He put in that budget, while he wasn't letting them open, that in the event they did open, there was going to be a 7% tax, sales tax to patients, and that those compassion centers would be paying 11% per month on their gross revenues. So, they started off, hey, they're supposed to be a nonprofit. We had that legislation when it first passed. We didn't even know if anyone would come forward who wanted to be a dispensary. We were the first ones in the country to regulate dispensaries.
Right.
So we really didn't know what to expect. Right away, he taxed them. Now, as you don't have to pay a tax on your prescription medications.
Correct.
And hopefully most people get third-party reimbursement for their prescriptions.
Mm-hmm.
Medical cannabis, you're not getting third-party reimbursement. No insurance company is helping you. You have to come up with the cash. It's not cheap. And in addition to that, you're going to pay a sales tax. And the compassion centers have another 11%, which they pass on to the patients. Why? So it's been very disappointing. So when the governor came up with that last year, it was a surreal moment, because actually we had conversations with her, and she was nothing but supportive prior to that. So it really was a disconnect that we have not been able to understand. So where that's at now is thanks to some wonderful legislators, and I would say DBR, or Norman at DBR, who ultimately went to DBR, was pretty helpful with this too. We got the amount down. We could not get rid of that tax, but we got down. So now it's $25 per plant. And if you are on SSI or SSDI, Medicaid, or if you're a disabled veteran, you don't have to pay anything. But, and I think that's been about a third of the tags that have been issued so far. So, but the important thing about that, though, is, okay, so we started out with this program, Patients and Caregivers Could Grow. Then last year, I think it is about 108 pages of new regulations for the medical marijuana.
Oh, good.
108 pages of regulations governing the medical marijuana program. So for those people who have been led to believe this is an unregulated program, this drives me crazy. It's the Wild West out there. I want to say this. First of all, before there was a medical marijuana program, guess what? People were growing marijuana that had nothing to do with the program.
Right.
And those people aren't going to stop because there is a program. But somehow the medical marijuana program has been scapegoated for, a lot of illegal activity. So 108 pages of regulations. I think it's 108, might be 120. In any event, that's what we have now, so that grows are regulated. Everybody has to be tagged. Anybody who is growing must be known to the health department and DBR. They have regulations on grows. It has to be safe,
I'm laughing. It's kind of like a sad laughter, because there is so much chaos in this state. But damn it, we've got the ALS and the terminal cancer and the epileptic population of this state. It's under control. Wow, I can breathe easier tonight. Outstanding.
And but that is what's so sad, because the medical marijuana program is something this state did right.
Right.
It did right. And there are certain people who are in, positions where they want to turn it into something else.
Which brings us, of course, to the fine village of North Smithfield, Rhode
Smithfield,
Island.
Smithfield.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it Smithfield?
Well, we got North Smithfield too, but Smithfield's a lawsuit.
Okay. So let's talk about Smithfield. First of all, was there any one, very often tragedy begets really bad public policy. So was there any compelling reason why the folks there decided to wake up one day and screw with this?
I think you might be referring to, there was a lot of newspaper attention
Right.
and media attention paid to a horrible incident in Smithfield where there was a family that was affected by carbon monoxide. There were
Right.
3 children and there was a mother. They all went to the hospital. It was horrible. Tragically, the mother died.
Mm-hmm.
The press story said that it was caused by her husband growing marijuana in the garage, something about he drilled a hole so a hose could come in. And it was completely blamed on the medical marijuana program. I think the Attorney General's office was quoted as saying, this is a guy who had just lost his wife, 3 children in the hospital, and they were saying they weren't sure whether they're going to bring charges against him. It was a legal grow, by the way. What we learned was he was growing 1 plant. I think it was 1 mature and 1 seedling. And when I went to the hearing in North Smithfield, I was braced because I thought that's what this was all going to be about. It's going to be about, isn't that how we react? There's a tragedy and then there's a reaction. And sometimes that reaction isn't always appropriate. So I thought it was going to be a very emotional hearing. There was not one word, not a word. As the police chief got up and he listed his list of grievances about the medical marijuana, people he had arrested. He had dates, I think, a list.
Mm-hmm.
That was not mentioned. The fire chief got up. He had a couple of instances where he thought people's wiring wasn't, up to code. There was no mention of this carbon monoxide death. So I fear that what has happened here is that really you're going to scapegoat the medical marijuana program for so many things, and then when push comes to shove, where's the evidence?
Right.
And so it's easy to go and something horrible happens and you get headlines, blame the medical marijuana program. There's never any follow-up. I have had conversations with a couple of well-meaning fire chiefs, and I have not heard that was the primary cause.
Right.
Let's just put it that way.
The late, great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci used to refer to stories as vapor stories. They would occupy the public's imagination. People with even barely a passing familiarity with the issues would weigh in. Talk radio would lose their minds. Facebook chat rooms and social media everywhere. And then one day something else would happen. And I think it was Emily Latella, the immortal Emily Latella from Saturday Night Live. Never mind.
Right.
But what's left in the wake
That's right.
of this foolishness, and to quote Bart Simpson, "I'm sorry, Mom, the mob has spoken." What's left in the wake are ruined reputations, public policy being dictated by, the tragedy du jour, and lives are affected, and all based on misinformation and urban legend.
Well, did you know that in the presentation done by the Attorney General's office, there are 3, I believe, caregivers in the state who have committed suicide because of medical marijuana? That is the claim that is being made by the Attorney General's office.
Is there any connection to reality at all?
I have no idea, and I don't mean to laugh because 3 people committed suicide. What I'm laughing at is the causal connection that they make to the medical marijuana garden without any details or any. That's just must have been a really tough harvest. I don't mean to make light of 3 people committing suicide, but
Yeah.
how do you blame that on someone's medical marijuana garden?
All right. So you don't.
Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you, but that's just an example of
Right.
It's so hard for us. We go to the State House and, like someone from law enforcement or the Attorney General's office will get up and say something like that, and we are just, what are we supposed to do with that? How are we supposed to challenge that? We had one instance where a guy, this was horrible. A guy was renting an apartment, he was broken into, and his landlord heard it. He was an ex-military guy, I guess, and he came down to protect his tenant, who was, I guess, being beaten up by these two guys. And he intervened. He was beaten. And he went to the hospital, and he died. Now, the claim was it was because of the marijuana plants. This guy had a couple of marijuana plants. It was all because of the marijuana plants. And I met this guy, and he said, no, that's not it at all. That's not why they were there. That's not what they wanted. And he came to one of the hearings and listened to law enforcement say that this was all about people breaking in to get his plants. And he said to me, no one would have wanted those plants. He wasn't doing well with the garden, the truth be known. And he said that's not why they were there. They were there for something else he had that was of value. So even then, we had a guy get up right after that testimony was made. Was anyone listening?
Right, and at the same time, they're so eager, and one representative in particular, Doc, is so eager to provide legislation which would disclose publicly.
That's right.
There's, and I use this
right.
term carefully, but there's this legal schizophrenia that seems to exist up in Halitosis Hall, all credit to Rudy Shakes, up there, that they are, and again, my words, not yours, they are so damn hell-bent to find something wrong with this program, because it seems to offend at some level their core, and I hate to dignify them with the term sensibilities, that they're willing to stretch for, reach out to, draw upon conclusions that have no relationship to fact or the real world whatsoever.
That's right, and there is this disconnect, because I will tell you, most of those people really do not dislike the medical marijuana program or its patients. They don't. If you sit them down and talk to them, if you talk to Attorney General Kilmartin himself, he will tell you stories about how he's helped people get into this program, and he voted for it when he was in the legislature, and he was good friends with Thomas C. Slater at the time, and he absolutely respects the patients and all of the intentions of the program. Where we have problems is when we start to talk about who can grow, who can't grow, and under what circumstances. Then the demonizing comes in.
By the way, just as an aside, I know that these are two very different sets of arguments, medical versus legalization.
Right.
If we would, and this is, again, the opinion of me and station management, if we would just simply, legalize this, all of this madness and chaos would go away.
Well, we got to be careful about that. We really do, because we don't want legalization to happen on the backs of patients. What some people are already saying is, well, we have to get rid of we can legalize it, but we need to get rid of all the home grows. That needs to be gotten rid of because we need to control this market better or something like that. So we can't have that. We can't have this happen on the backs of the patients. If we could craft legalization in a way that would be helpful to patients, and we could. We do have that ability.
Right.
That would be great. But we are afraid that it might not happen that way. Because right now, let me tell you, we have sick people. Sick people have to go through this application, a renewal every year to the health department. Sometimes, they don't get together to do that. Sometimes what happens is they might be in the hospital, when their license comes up to renewal. They fall through the cracks. They can't go to the compassion center with an expired license. Right. If it were legal, well, at least maybe that would be a short-term help for them. Right. And so for reasons like that, we are supportive of it, but we are also afraid that they could do this in a way that could hurt patients too. So we've got to be careful. Right. And by the way, Pat, and I know you know this better than anybody, but I think it's worth saying, let's remember, this is a plant. Yes. It is a plant. It is not the devil's lettuce. It is this incredible, beautiful plant that has all this healing potential. And it's something that people can grow in their own homes. Will they ever be able to tell them that they can't effectively, ever? They've gone mad. Let's talk about the lawsuit then. Now, what has Smithfield, I'm sorry, let me get my villages right. Smithfield. Smithfield, right. Not North Smithfield. We have a few more though. Well, they're right behind it. Okay. So what has Smithfield chosen to enact in terms of legislation? I'm sorry, this is not funny, but when I say it, I feel like I must be joking. They decided instead of 12 mature plans, a patient only needs 2. 2. And by the way, let's as we go down through these list of, as far as I'm concerned, near criminal offenses, what
just mathematically, the odds of successfully growing medicine from 2 plants at any level equivalent to what the needs are of the patient. And remember, the word very often forgotten in all of this debate, all of the questions, all the legalities, all the posturing, is the word patient.
Right,
Because these folks are patients.
that's right.
So what is 12 to 2? It sounds so innocuous, but in terms of these folks' ability, again, remember, very many of these folks, their ability to engage in farming while they're not feeling well, I'm being facetious here, is somewhat limited, but what does that do to their potential supply?
It devastates it. Now, every patient is different. I mean, there could be a patient or two out there who only grow 2 plants. But here's the thing, because you can only have a very small amount of usable, right?
Right.
2 plants isn't going to do it for, I would say, 90% of the
Right.
patients. So also, by having them saying you can only have 2 plants, you're kind of encouraging people to grow huge plants so they can get as much as they can possibly get off it. So
Right.
it can last longer. And that's setting them up to be illegal. But the really disturbing thing that happened in Smithfield was they just decided 2 plants. They didn't talk to anybody. There was no
So there was no
analysis of this.
rationale underlying this at any level.
No. And they also decided, a lot of patients cannot grow for themselves, so they appoint a caregiver to grow for them. No, that's not, no longer, that is not allowed in Smithfield.
And by the way, this is after, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because there were so many revisions of the changes made this past year. At one point in time, if a caregiver had excess capacity or excess production, they were able to gift it to other folks who were unable to produce that. So what you've just done is a double whammy.
Right.
You have folks who are in a real position to generate medicine. And I just have, as an aside, I just have to throw this out. We've got a legitimate medicine here that in the year 2017, we are asking, in many cases, seriously chronically ill people to go out and have to produce for themselves. Let's think about the absurdity of that. The criminal absurdity of, if I need erythromycin, do I have to go out and with mortar and pestle in my living room produce it for myself?
I would hope not.
Right. I mean, if I need any one of a number of medicines that middle-aged men often engage in, do I have to produce it myself?
We won't mention which ones.
Right. But I know I'm being silly, but think of just the sheer stupidity of this situation.
No one should have to grow their own medicine. On the other hand, for some patients, it's their lifeline and it's their therapy as well.
I understand that, and they should have the choice to do that. But what is this, 1630? I mean, is this the 17th century? Do we have to go down to the sorcerer in the village square to go out and get medicine that's legitimately
I'm pretty
giving
sure
folks
those
these
days
quality
you
of
could
life?
grow it.
Yeah, you probably could.
Could probably grow it outside too.
Right. All right. So they've taken this down to this. We get 2 plants. What you can't gift it. How much are you?
Well, you could, but what have you got to gift?
Right. So.
You don't have enough. And so they also say no compassion centers, no co-ops. Also, if you do grow, you have to register with the town. You can only grow in your own residence. You have to register with the town, and you have to get a zoning certificate. You have to be inspected. You cannot grow. You have to have 2 means of egress. So if you grow in a basement and there's only 1 means of egress, then you're out of luck. No more. You can't have the plants anymore. They have to be more than 10 feet from a heating source. Not sure why that is. So there were a lot of. I can't imagine that anyone is going to go down and report to the town of Smithfield to get a certificate. The likelihood of confidentiality, first of all, this is really dangerous.
Right.
We're not playing on this. This is dangerous.
Right.
I cannot tell you how many town officials in different towns have told me things that I should not know about patients and caregivers. Everybody's identity in this program is confidential unless they choose otherwise, and for good reason. First of all, it's their healthcare information. Second of all, if they're growing, particularly, they can't let it be known. So what the town is saying is, no, you have to register with us at the town. And by the way, the state statute says, if you were to tell me the identity of someone in the medical marijuana program, you'd be liable for a $1,000 fine, 6 months in jail. So here's my question to the town of Smithfield. Now they're saying, oh, they'll keep it confidential. Okay. Well, technically it already is confidential under the state law, and the towns and cities haven't been doing really well on that. I know of a building inspector who told a reporter where the grows were in town. I mean, people do, town governments are not known for, I don't know, respecting privacy rights, I guess.
Not so much.
People talk. So no one is comfortable going to their local town hall and registering, and also no one would be safe. I'll tell you this as well. The minute, I need patients to understand this, because patients in Smithfield are so upset. They've been devastated. I have people who live in Smithfield that don't even grow, and they're calling me every week because they're scared.
Right.
And it doesn't seem rational. Like, this is not going to affect them because they don't grow. They go to the compassion centers to get their medicine. But you know what does affect them? The incredible hostility with which the town council passed this resolution with total disregard for them. They are convinced that somehow they are going to get in trouble.
Right.
And some of these folks, I talked to one woman, she knows some of those city councilors, town councilors. She's never going to tell them she's in the medical marijuana. You know what she told me? She's always kept it pretty much to herself that she's in the medical marijuana program. And she is so glad that she never told them because she can't trust them.
You're applying stigma to medicine.
That's right. So you are scaring people who are sick and have debilitating, and they are enough to cope with without worrying. And this is what they think. It's a guy who's growing perfectly legally, way within his limits. I talked to him for hours, Pat, and I could not convince him that the police were not going to come bursting through his doors and
Right.
somehow do something terrible to him. And that is what they think, and they are scared. And this is where they live. And who needs this kind of stress where you live?
Well, and let's reflect on a conversation you and I had a year ago. You're taking folks again who, regardless of your background, your political affiliation, religious, whatever, you understand, and we should all understand, the mental aspect of fighting serious illness.
That's right.
All right? We all know at this point, while science is still figuring out the whys and the wheres, that folks' attitude, the whole notion of I'm going to fight this illness, it is critical to the well-being of, I'm going to use the P word again, ready? The patient. Yes, folks in the Smithfield Town Council, you're screwing with the lives of patients. It's so important. And these folks have so many external pressures anyway. Family, jobs, financial pressures. And
Listening to the news every day, wondering if they're going to have health care.
right. So one has to beg the question, and we all know how petty small towns can be. We all know how self-absorbed they can be. We all know how obnoxious people in local politics can be, because there's always been a measurable percentage that are using their position because it's a power trip. There are so many people who are engaged in public service for the right reason, but we all know there's a significant minority who are doing it because they're on a power trip. So how petty, how capricious do you have to be to screw with the lives of patients? And so now the town of Smithfield, they're getting sued by the ACLU.
And us,
And this was
RIPAC, and a couple of patients from Smithfield.
right. And this was so predictable. I mean, we referenced it earlier in the show. The folks just won an expensive lawsuit based on job discrimination. The program is encoded in state law.
That's right.
At what point in time do these towns feel that they have the right to screw with taxpayers' money in a challenged environment that we live in to execute their own personal prejudices?
I got a call from a Smithfield caregiver. He had just found out about the ordinance. He said, I just went to DBR. I purchased tags. I'm a caregiver. I'm growing for a family member. The state issued me tags so he can grow 12 and 12 for his loved one. That's 12 mature plants, 12 seedlings, up to that. So he goes and he buys his tags, comes home, finds out there's this ordinance. He said, what am I supposed to do? And I said, well, the state says you're legal. It's not criminal for you to do it. So what they can do, the power of the city and town, you know what they can do? They can issue a zoning ordinance. And let me tell you what happens. The second they issue someone a zoning ordinance, a citation, right? A citation. The moment that they do, they have just violated the state law. Because you can only violate that ordinance if you're a patient or caregiver.
Right.
Citations of public records, if you have to appeal it, that's certainly going to be public.
Right.
So the person in that town who writes out that citation could be in very serious jeopardy. I'm talking about potential 6 months in jail, $1,000 fine. That's what the state law says.
Right.
But apparently, some of the towns know better than we do. But what I need the patients and caregivers of Smithfield to know is that right now the state does not issue lists of to a town saying, okay, here's everyone who's growing and here's their addresses. They don't know that. It's very hard to convince people of that, but it's true.
Well, because, if you've lived in Rhode Island long enough, there's a political paranoia that exists because we all know, and there are politicians in power right now, who will use any means necessary to advance themselves personally. It's endemic in the state. It's the state culture, and again, you're talking about folks whose lives are in danger, which is usually what precipitated their involvement in the program in the first place.
That's right. And we're having, North Smithfield is right behind them with a similar ordinance. Gloucester, slightly so. They didn't limit the plant count for patients, but they eliminated caregivers and made it impossible inspection requirements for patients. Gloucester, same thing. My personal favorite is probably Johnston.
Ah, Johnston. The same people who...
Please forgive my sarcasm. I just...
No, this is personal.
I grew up in that kind of sarcastic...
Listen, the whole point of this show is for folks to bleed with their issues. And here we have the town of Johnston, who just... I'm going to file a request to find out what the hell they just spent on fighting this losing lawsuit against Invenergy. I mean, there are real dollars at stake here. It occupies the time and the energies of a government that clearly has got too much time and energy on there to begin with. But I'm not sure why they go on these messianic trips thinking that they are the all-powerful Oz. And Johnston is a perfect example of that. Well, don't they have anything better to do?
I've always, liked Johnston, and I've always liked all the towns in Rhode Island, actually. But Johnston, and now this is a proposed amendment. Right. I don't know if they've scheduled a hearing for it yet. Haven't found that out. But this one kind of takes the cake. Mm-hmm. Because what we have here is, we're talking about the town inspectors coming in. I mean, how would they know a grow was there, right? Unless they happen to come across it accidentally or something. Well, in the town of Johnston, their inspectors, if they believed that there was a zoning violation, or that there could be in the future, they have... Putting
on my Karnak hat. Yeah.
They would have the right to enter the home of a patient or a caregiver.
Oh, Fourth Amendment. Is Alfred E. Newman in charge, what me worry, of the town of Johnston?
Now, and I'll also imagine if you're a town inspector, you're not just going to walk into someone's home by yourself. You will bring the police with you.
Right.
So, yeah, Fourth Amendment. I don't know who drafts these things.
Well, ostensibly, attorneys are involved. But yet, again, we know how the movie ends. They were not in
my law school class. I don't know.
And God bless the ACLU, because you've got volunteer attorneys.
Yes.
Working on behalf of an aggrieved citizenry who are going to teach...
Barton and Gilman.
Yep. Who are going to teach...
John Mira.
Teach these people their lesson, and they'll go home, they'll get their but they'll have cost your town an enormous amount of money. They'll have really shredded the town spirit in a real sense. But again, the people who suffer the most are the patients.
Well, there was a zoning suit in South Kingstown
Mhm.
that did not go well for the town. It probably took about 3 years to litigate it. They told this guy he couldn't grow. He was the only guy, they told, in the town, he couldn't grow.
Mhm.
There was a zoning, they said it was a zoning violation. I think it was like 2.5, maybe 3 years to litigate that one. They lost. The town lost. And the judge referred to their reasoning as tortured reasoning.
Right.
Because I believe this is how it went, at least in part this was their argument. Oh, you can grow marijuana, that's okay, but you can't manufacture, and as soon as you do something with that plant, it's not just growing. So in other words, you could
What the meaning of the word grow is?
you could grow it, but you couldn't, I guess, harvest it.
Right.
Right. So it was a very convoluted argument, but I think that's what they said. And the judge referred to their reasoning as tortured. So that cost the good people of, South Kingstown, I don't know what they had to pay in their legal fees,
Mhm.
but for what? For what?
Some-
I mean, that was kind of an embarrassing suit. Why?
Some town crank or some, self-absorbed politician got on their proverbial high horse, made patients' lives, again, there's that P word again, made patients' lives miserable, and cost their town a fortune.
And yeah, and it's unfortunate. But I will tell you one thing: when the towns do get educated, we, for the most part, have not seen horrible ordinances. We've seen some that we're not happy with, but they're not as extreme as these. But they have. I mean, Westerly started out with an ordinance a couple of years ago that was extreme, and it was really bad. But they spent. I will give them credit for spending hours and hours talking to us. We didn't come out with everything that we wanted from that, but I will give them credit for taking the time and for trying to understand things. But when you have someone like Smithfield, it's like, no, we know better, I guess, bye-bye, or we don't care. End of story. Maybe it was someone's birthday present or something.
Do you find that the other towns, I've got to believe they're aware of the situation, that they're about to spend a lot of legal fees
Sure.
fighting a problem that they really don't have?
Right.
Do you think a lot of these towns will take a deep breath until
I
this
hope so.
lawsuit?
I hope so. And I hope that people will start contacting their town councilors. People are much more to know, first of all, who their federal senators are and congressmen are. They do.
Right.
They generally know that. I go through this a lot with people. When we say to someone, "Well, you better call your state rep," they will usually call Sheldon Whitehouse,
Right.
because that's who the names they're familiar with.
Right.
So they're less apt to know who their state representatives are.
Mm-hmm.
They're even less likely to know who represents them on town council.
Right.
So, but what I'm trying to say I understand that patients and caregivers do not want to reveal their identities. Fair enough. Good idea. But are there other people in the towns and cities who think this is obnoxious?
Right. We talk about this on the show a lot. There are issues that people personalize, and then there are issues that people should be aware of and need to get involved in. I'll always use the example. We had someone from Providence who I adore, a good friend, who actually literally said on the show one night, "Why do I care about what happens to people in Barrowville?" Well, because it can happen to you. And we have to have each other's back. And because it's just
And also,
bad policy.
this is Rhode Island. Doesn't he know anyone in Barrowville?
No, and so,
No cousins, nothing?
and as is the case, people of goodwill need to reach out in this situation. They need to be, first and foremost, aware of what's going on in their own community. We're fortunate in Cumberland, we've got the Valley Breeze, and the Valley Breeze does a really nice job of keeping people, and the Valley Breeze has got papers throughout the northern
Yes.
Rhode Island, and they
They're
keep
good.
people aware of what's going on.
Go Jackie.
Yeah,
I
folks,
talked to her today.
you need to engage so you're aware of this madness before it costs your town hundreds of thousands of dollars in litigation costs, because I have found that the ACLU's cases are adopted very carefully.
Yes.
The ACLU is not, despite some people's claims, out there chasing judgments. They're not the civil equivalent of ambulance chasers. They're looking at the cases carefully, they're analyzing them, impact on the community, the seriousness of the issue, and of course, the law. And the ACLU is fortunate to have amongst its cadre of volunteer lawyers some of the finest litigants in this state who take it very personally.
You know, they really do. We've had, with Kayla, with John Deneen a couple of years ago, we filed a lawsuit. They were nothing but spectacular. I mean, you're talking about people who get committed to an issue, to an ideal, to a principle, and they are not doing it for personal gain.
Right.
They are so refreshing.
No, and these are attorneys who are very, very busy.
Yeah.
These are not, they're not sitting around waiting to do title closings. No harm to the title closers out there. These are not people sitting around waiting for something to do. These are some of the most powerful, successful litigants here in the state. And
Hear that, John Miro?
yeah, and
He's one of our current lawyers.
and if I can quote John Rambo, probably the only time we'll quote John Rambo on this show, Smithfield, they're coming to get you. JoAnne, thank you again for gracing us with your presence. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Pat.
No, I
love this new setup. I feel like we're on the Today Show.
You're right. This is Rhode Island Today Show.
People should be at the window.
Right. We haven't had any twerkers tonight, thank God. We get that here. We get that here from time to time. But please keep us aware. If folks, if you're listening now, or you listen to this over the next few days, if you're aware of your town council engaging in this type of debate and discussion, let us at the coalition know. Let JoAnne Leppanen at RIPAC know.
www.ripatience, that's patience with a TS, .org.
Right.
We don't know what's going on in the cities and towns unless someone tells us.
Right. And then, if we find out too late, because we need to inject a note of common sense into this. And on that moment too, how can folks donate to RIPAC? Because again, you're an organization, on one hand, the state, it's a very unfair situation. The state has effectively outsourced to you folks really the patient care, a lot of the patient care aspect of the medical cannabis program, and they're doing it so on your organization's dime.
Oh, what time?
Yeah.
But www.ripatience, not like the virtue, like the people in the hospital.
Yep.
Patience.org. And there's a donate button there.
Yep.
And also, you can always send me an email. It's JoAnne, JoAnne, at ripatience.org.
Right.
And I'd be happy to answer any of your questions, or, tell you where to send checks,
Right.
whatever.
And listen, if you've had a family member who has been a part of this program, then take some time over the next couple of weeks and recognize them and their participation in that program, and hopefully they're a successful graduate of it. But there are so many folks who have gone before us who have, recognize the contribution of this organization to their lives, spending a few bucks and donating it to RIPAC, because all of the consultation that they offer, the advice, the mediation, in this case, helping spearhead a lawsuit against folks, and remember, it's personal, against folks who are either in your family now or someday maybe, or God forbid, quite honestly, if you're listening to the show, there's a significant chance that sometime in your life, in the coming years, you'll be a participant in this program. So it's time to take care of them now. JoAnne, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Pat. You're the best.
All right.